Well, thanks for joining us in this panel. You both have done incredible work. And like I said, I've been having conversations around masculinity with men in Hollywood in terms of films. And we're finding out that there's definitely a shift. And I guess for you, I'll start with you, Ms. Bravo. What was the process like for you in writing a film with a male lead who was clearly socially uncomfortable and depicting the character in that manner? And what was your process in constructing it and collaborating with the
male actor?
Yes.
Yes, I co-wrote Lemon with Brett Gelman, who is also in the movie. And our process, I think I understand what your question is, but it just was, right? There wasn't because there is a male protagonist, it has to be different. I approached it the way I would approach anything, and I saw myself as Isaac. Isaac is who Brett plays, and so for both of us, in writing that part and him playing it and me directing it, it was it's a manifestation of our own feelings of anxiety, our own fear of failure, and being in a body that is not socialized. I mean, right. I'm significantly more socialized than that character is, but is that the time? Like there's a countdown in my face, and that's how I feel about that. But yeah, So
was it intentional? Was it like, as a writer, you know, as creators, we write characters, we say you write from experience. Now, you know, we're looking at the male gaze. Do you think about the character as a male, or do you think of him as a person experiencing? Okay.
No, he's just a human. He's just a human that exists in a white male body, which I have a ton of experience with, as you can tell. I think that how that is explored, this film in particular is a commentary on, I work in comedy, and I tried for a very long time to be a director in this space, and I felt there wasn't room for me, and so this movie is in conversation with these kinds of movies of 40-year-old guys who don't have jobs, who live in large places, who have great partners, who they're unkind to, who seem supported by their families, and that things seem to work out for. And so I wanted to Brett and I wanted to put ourselves in that space, but have it all be failure. You know, so it's like failing at love, failing at family, and failing at work. And so that's what that was. And for both of us, we exorcised our own feelings around this idea of waking up one day and not having arrived of where you meant to arrive, and what that kind of paralysis would manifest itself like. I think that for Isaac, it's that paralysis manifests, I can't say that word, so that's good to know. But he's having a frustration because he feels he deserves something, right? Like life has told him that he deserves a certain amount of thing, and he hasn't arrived at it. And so when you meet him, he is at this kind of crossroads and confusion where everything that he had been presented with before told him that it was going to be fine. And I think because of in his maleness or in his whiteness, perhaps that is, he's coming to terms with that.
And that's a really great thing, because a lot of conversations we've been having with men, there's an honesty and a vulnerability about expectations placed on you as a man to be a certain way. These are the goals you must have. So it's interesting that you bring that up. I have another question for you about intersection. You were from Panama and the US, and you know, I'm a black male filmmaker, and I'm always thinking...
Black male, okay, good, all right, good to know.
If you haven't noticed,
that's what's happening here. Okay.
If you haven't noticed, but you know, it's about intersection. Like, do you think about your racial, ethnic, cultural background in addition to being a woman when you construct male characters or characters in general, or is it how do you separate it?
No, thank you for having me. No, I don't. I mean, it just is. I am just
Right,
inside
right.
of this body, and most of the characters, or most of the work that I'm working on, tends to be, at least when I approach something, I think, what do I want to exorcise here?
Right.
And so, because if I start to not see myself in the character, then I won't really be working, because most characters don't, you know. And so, I've managed to. It's not that I'm divorcing myself, obviously. Like I'm bringing my own experience, my energy, how I live in my body, to all of those characters and their maleness or their whiteness. I for a while wrote a lot of male characters. Most of my protagonists happened to be men, and it wasn't until someone had said that to me that I realized that they had been men. And I think masculine, feminine are not words that I tend to use a lot, but I am very solar in my energy. I am pointed, and I was raised by solar and pointed women. And I think that I arrived at writing male characters because that seemed to be where there was the most room in film or on screen for that kind of expression. But I saw myself in that. That is how I lead. And so I think I manifested myself as male, I guess, but I wasn't conscious of it.
Amazing. Thank you.
I want to comment about that.
Yes.
Because I also have been thinking about, since we got invited to come here, and I was thinking that maybe when you say the female gaze or the masculine gaze, you also think about, you work within a patriarchal structure to become that. So I was thinking, like, what can we call it instead? And I was thinking, like, what about perception? Like, what if you just have, like, the perception of the other human being, rather than being, like, tainted by color or like social performance or culture, anything like that. So
And that makes sense, because there's a lot of conversation that gender is socially constructed. And we're going through a movement right now where we're looking beyond gender with the trans movement, etc.
Yeah, and if you think about, like, one of the oldest, most successful myth of our society is Catholicism, and you think of Noah's Ark. Like, I was thinking, like, what if we had a Noah Ark, since there's like the climate crisis going on right now. Like,
Oh, there is?
yeah.
What?
I left all the lights on. Yeah, there's some people leaving the lights on, especially in New York. Everything is on all 24/7. But yeah, I was thinking, like, how do you do this transmission where you also take care of Earth and ourselves, right? Like, how do you do that? Like, what if there was like a Noah's Ark today? Like, what are we gonna put in there? Is it gonna be just like, oh, now it's gonna be like the replacement of the patriarchy and it's gonna be too matriarchy? Like, I don't feel like that. Like, I feel like we just need to make space for everybody.
Space for everybody.
Yeah.
So your film was, I enjoyed it, and I enjoyed, Margarita, I enjoyed, that you had a male lead. So Peter Jorn is the character, and he is going through a transition in his life. He's sort of failed and is trying to resurrect himself. But you have an interesting parallel with the nun, and however the film focuses mainly on him.
I guess we didn't see the nun, but yeah, there's. It's interesting because he's also dealing with failure, and how as a man you're also, or as anyone, you're supposed to achieve something in society rather than just like again, like just perceiving everybody and perceiving your life and just enjoy the ride, right? It's difficult if you put so much pressure. And I was thinking, like, okay, yeah, I live in the city in New York, and when I travel, I see that pretty much all the main cities, if you want to call them the main cities, are in this kind of linear and uniform way of being. Like, what is life like in the countryside, in a mountaintop for a nun? Like, there are people who want to be nuns today, and they are nuns. So what is that like? So it was just like a question. Sometimes I do things without knowing too much about it, because then when I'm making it and I'm learning a lot. So then there was the parallel life between someone who lives in a city in a way that we're traveling all the time, from jumping from LA, New York, Paris, London, like all this crazy traveling that is our generation, as opposed to someone who is just in nature, talking to her God and exploring herself in that kind of life. And then they meet.
Yeah, I thought it was an interesting connection when they met in the film, and so how the roles sort of like switched. But your process is, in filming, is sort of, you have a script but you rely on improv. And I want to ask both of you a question about just being on set as women, working with male actors and male crew, thinking about that dynamic. Did you, encounter any differences in terms of perceptions of the characters, perceptions of choices the characters would make? Were there any disagreements, or how did that go?
Well, in my case, I had a scriptment for that movie, and I generally do documentaries, and I actually also have focused a lot in men, and only until someone pointed out, they realized, like, oh yeah, most of the characters are men. What does that mean?
And you didn't really think, like, you're just...
No, documentaries, like even short documentaries, they're all men. I think mainly because when I've asked, women have said no. That's also happened. So I don't have too many documentaries on women, or at all, actually. I feel like that gender thing, I only experienced it more like in film school. And then those guys that I was with, they're Scandinavian and they're super feminist. So anything I would say, they were like cool with it. And I work in my team is always both female and men. It's never like only women or only one woman.
Right.
Yeah.
It's interesting you say film school. I also teach film, and in classes, a lot of times there's that gender divide with equipment and who's going to be your DP, and it's a conversation that young women filmmakers are having right now, and so it's something that to kind of put out there. How about you? Did you feel, being the head of the film, you're the boss, in a sense, right? Did you feel,
Absolutely,
did you get pushback?
yes.
And I'm talking about the crew, like the crew, and then also the industry. Was there pushback? Like, what do you encounter in terms of having that position?
I mean, making things is always a little crunchy. I don't know that pushback, I was met with pushback because of myself. I think I was met with pushback because those spaces tend to have that kind of energy when you're inviting people to make something with you and they are creative and they have feelings. Like, it just, it's an emotional kind of soup. I found that with Lemon specifically, the cast was incredibly generous and wonderful, and they were not any of my issues. All my issues were everything else. But yeah, it's hard to pinpoint. It's been a couple of years, and I'm sure whatever was dark, I repressed, and we have the great, this industry has this really beautiful kind of amnesia, especially if something turns out well, you kind of forget the trauma. Like, I know that there's trauma because I like feel it, I'm watching it and I'm like I was experiencing trauma, so I know there were bad vibes, but I can't specifically remember what they were. I mean, I have a couple, but those are not to be shared. I think you asked me about improv too. I don't know. I remember,
That's fair enough. Yeah, about the pushback and sort of like in the industry that is male dominated, how you are perceived by folks.
I've had the luck, I guess, of getting to work as a director for about 4 or 5 years now. And I went to theater school 15 or 16 years ago, I don't even remember, and did not do that for a very long time. And when I first was getting my opportunities or first getting to make stuff, I found myself being very concerned with how I was being perceived, and I really wanted to be liked. And at a certain point, it was so exhausting to be thinking about that while also making, while also being Black. I was like, oh my God, I'm so tired. I'm just so tired. And I don't care about that anymore. And what matters to me is kindness, but whatever is going to be decided about me will be decided. If someone thinks I'm a cunt, they're gonna think I'm a cunt. It doesn't matter what I do. Like, that's already been decided. The moment I walk into the room, I'm being treated a certain way. And so I am not really bothered, or it's not on my list. My list is making the work. It's getting the chance to continue to make, and if you like me, great, and if you don't, great. Like, I just want to make things, you know? And so it is, it's just a waste of time. I mean, most of the men in this room who are filmmakers. I can't even really see men, but I think they're here. I feel male energy.
Men are here. There's male energy.
I'm like, they're here. Oh my God, you're holding the clock. I totally didn't see your face. I just saw the time, but not your face. My apologies. But
so you don't see men.
I just don't think that men are thinking about that. I don't think you're like, oh man, I hope they like me in this meeting where I'm trying to get a job. I think you're just like, I hope I get the job. And if it's romantic, sure, you're thinking about that. But like when it comes to the job, you just want the job and you want to do a good job. And I just feel confident in myself, and I know that I'm special, and I know that my voice is necessary, and I just don't think about that, you know? And if there's gonna be pushback, well, I'm gonna push back harder. That's just it, so.
Awesome.
I'm tired, guys. I'm so
it's
tired.
Good. It's good. So I can open it up if some men or anyone in the room would like to ask a question, or I'm opening it up. But there's this idea that I want to put out there to kind of wrap up a little bit about performing gender. Performing gender. We know it's socially constructed in a lot of ways, like male, female, man. There are traits that are ascribed to men and traits that may be ascribed to women. And is there a pressure to perform gender in certain situations in a work setting?
Absolutely. I don't know if you.
So performing gender. So there's some traits that are more considered more masculine, right? And some traits considered more feminine. And do you feel like a question is about when you enter the room. Do you feel like you need to perform some type of trait or gender trait? And I say this because, you know, it happens a lot with sometimes the people of color, right? You go into certain spaces and you feel like, there's a consciousness of your presence in the room. And there's a certain need for code switching or performance. Do you feel in any situations?
I get it. Yeah. Well, I have a funny accent and I'm kind of quirky. So I kind of just, like what JANICZA was saying, is like, how can I change myself so much? I can't. I just have to have this accent and just be quirky. Like, do it more. Right? Because I mean, it's easy. I know it's very easy to be in the mainstream. If you're like in the part of the mainstream, that's like so easy life. Yeah. But if you're like with an accent or you're this or that, it's harder. But I don't think you should limit yourself or like go around it, or even like portray yourself as somebody else. Because I think that actually brings the culture down rather than make it more alive. It's like if you go to the forest, I mean, you want to see a variety. You just don't want to see certain type of bird or no ants or no leaves or no flowers, right? So I think it's just like, yeah, again, it's like this perception. Like how do you really tune into everything that is around you without doing this thing that is objectifying everything and making it kind of be something that you need to do. Yeah?
Yeah. And it seems like we're moving beyond, I think what's happening now in the industry is we're moving beyond the male gaze, right? And with the more content that's coming out, we're getting into this space of perception, of just perception.
Yeah, and also thinking about other stories, because I think, of course, there are beautiful human stories, and Shakespeare is great, and all the canon. That's not going to go away. That's going to stay in the library. But what are the new stories, and do we need to tell things in three acts? Do you know? So there's all these things that are happening right now that because sometimes there's so much noise, we're not able to really focus on like, oh, there's all these new things and people are thinking new things, like we're evolving all the time. So I think like right now there's a lot of evolution on how we can tell a story or what stories we can tell. Like I was in April filming ant hunters in Colombia, and I realized that the woman who was teaching her 1-year-old son how to hunt these ants that are really ugly, they're like this big, and they fly. And she was telling him, it's so beautiful, and the little boy was like, ugh. Not really, but at some point he got it, and then I realized, you know, there's this transmission of the mother to the son that we as people who live in the cities do not have, on how to relate to the world, on how, so we need to have those stories. We need to portray those stories in screens so that everybody can see how do you transmit being emotional literate for a man. Have more of that, you know?
Yes, thank you. Are there any questions from the audience? It's sort of a broad topic and we have just a little bit of time, but anything regarding, yes?
Most of my days feeling bad, so I highly recommend that. No, you know, my favorite thing to do is, if none of this works out, I would love to do visual research, and I can think of myself as a dramaturg, and the way that I sort of like get my rocks off is every day I do about an hour of visual research for things that don't exist. And that is to say, like, something pops into my head and I like want to do the most aggressive visual research of it, and we'll spend an hour, 5, 6 hours just doing that, and then there'll be little pops of writing. But I'm mostly in what are writing pockets. That is what I tend to do, is more visual research. I have like 20,000 images for nothing. And if we're friends and you ever want access to that for your other work, I'm happy to show you, because I have so much. But that is mostly what I spend my time doing, is visual research. And I watch a lot. I don't read as much as I should be. I'm sorry, my brain is fully atrophying, but I watch a lot. I do a lot of watching. One more question is what that says. I don't know if that was helpful.
Cool. So we can take one more question from the audience. I see two. The first one I saw.
Filmmaker, you watch films, or you say you watch a lot of things. What are some of the films that like kind of gelled?
Recently or just in life?
Well, I mean, but as you were developing your filmmaker self, did you start to? I'm obsessed with Fellini, and I identify with it, even though my work was nothing like it. I'm just curious if there's a filmmaker, so are, you know, how you kind of find your center or inspire you, and then you're chasing that somehow in your work, or. And you too, I'm interested as well.
I think what you said about Fellini feels right to me, in that the people that I'm most drawn to, I don't feel myself trying to emulate. I like wish that I could, but I don't even know how to arrive at that. Yeah. But, oh, there's a mic. And for me, it's Fassbinder, it's Cassavetes, it's Bob Fosse, and you know, they're all theater people. I'm a theater person. I think that's why I'm deeply attracted to them. They kind of work in a proscenium space, and they're theater makers who arrived at filmmaking.
Oh, me too?
Margarita.
Yes.
Okay. I go through phases. I mean, I guess I remember seeing Lars von Trier when I was a teenager and was really impressed with this movie Europa, where it starts with some hypnosis. I feel like that or Buñuel as a Latin American person, kind of this surrealist, yeah. But I feel like I'm informed by many different things, also art and theater. performance. Like right now, there's like a lot of live performance happening, at least in New York where I've been living. And I feel like that connection to be in the, you know, like right now we're all here in this same room. It's very beautiful, and it's hard to capture that in film sometimes.
Awesome. I'm seeing the countdown, so it seems that we have to wrap it up. But I want to thank you both for being here. This is just the beginning of a conversation. I wanted to get in a little more, but you know, we encourage you to keep. You know, there are a few men around somewhere at the festival in Idlewild.
I see more now.
And so now you see them. You see, we're here. But
yeah.
the men have a presence.
Do they have a question?
They don't have a question. But thank you for engaging in this conversation. And I think the takeaway that I got from this is that, you know, you're thinking about performing gender, what's more important in the process is the work, right? And it seems, I'm getting from both of you, like the perception, the male gaze and the male perception, at least that old school dynamic doesn't really exist. What's more important is what the stories we're gonna tell, right? And writing from your truth. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.